Good evening and welcome to Election 2014. Tonight is the sixth and final show in our series of live debates in the lead up to the coming general election on the 20th of September, which is this Saturday. Tonight we have some extra viewers, or at least some that we now know about following Mr.com's release this week. So welcome to our special guests from the GCSB and we hope that you enjoy the show. In the final week, candidates are frantically looking for the most vote-effective way to spend their precious remaining hours as they rapidly approach polling day. The colourful and busy fence lines that have been covered with electoral signs will once again become clear. Each week on Election 2014, we've been joined by candidates on an electorate-by-electorate basis looking to represent their respective areas in the next Parliament. We have discussed critical issues facing electorates and also those issues facing the wider Canterbury region. As I said at the outset, the next 3 years could undoubtedly be one of the most important periods for the wider Canterbury region in this crucial phase of rebuild and recovery. Some will say the road of Christchurch recovery has turned the corner and the destination will be largely in the hands of the next government. We can only wait and see. Where we will end up will largely depend on who is taking us there. Each week on the show, I ask the question, and for those of you who watch us weekly, and I said the same last week, you'll know what I'm about to say. How well do you, the viewer, know your candidate, what they stand for, and how effective they will be if elected to represent their electorate in the next government? Voting day is this Saturday, and we hope that through watching Election 2014, you are better informed when you come to cast your vote. This week, we're joined by candidates from the Wigram electorate. The seat existed between 1969 and 1978 when it was held by Labour candidate Mick Connolly. Sydenham, at the core of the electorate, which was re-established in 1996 and was then held by Jim Anderton in his various political cloaks, and reverted to Labour when Megan Woods won the seat in 2011. Interestingly enough, however, the National Party candidate in the last election, Sam Collins, won the party vote, showing that the once die-hard Labour seat had become a little bit more multi-partisan. I start this evening with welcoming sitting Labour MP for Wigram, Labour candidate Megan Woods.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having us here.
Thank you. I have pleasure in welcoming Green Party candidate Richard Wesley. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure. I have pleasure in being joined by Lois McClintock, Internet Mana Party.
Thank you very much for having us.
Pleasure. And finally, to round off the lineup, we've got Carl Varley, National Party candidate. Good evening, Carl.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, Tim.
It's a pleasure. So now, following format of previous weeks, I would like each candidate to tell you about themselves at a personal level. Talk about their personal experience and their personal alignment with the party that they represent. Each candidate will have between 90 seconds and 2 minutes. And tonight, I'd like to start with the sitting MP, Megan Woods.
Thanks, Tim. Good evening. I'm your local MP here in the Wigram electorate. And Wigram matters to me because Wigram is my home too. From Avonhead to Addington, from Spraydon to Sockburn, from Hornby to Hoonhay and everywhere in between, for the last 3 years that I've been your MP, I've been working hard for you. Our electorate in Wigram had some of the least earthquake damaged suburbs in the city, but the recovery of Christchurch is literally happening in our backyards. And we need to make sure that we've got good planning and that we've got good infrastructure in place to make sure that our neighbourhoods remain the livable neighbourhoods where we all chose to make our lives. Traffic congestion, roads that are clogged up, we need a plan for that. I'm backing commuter rail to the north and to the west of the city as a solution to that. We must address issues of housing affordability. Too many of the constituents in this electorate are having to leave because they can no longer afford to live in this electorate, and that's something that must be addressed sooner rather than later. I'm in politics because I believe people matter, and I'm in Labour because I'll always put people first. That one of my political heroes and someone who once held part of this seat was Norman Kirk, and he summed it up pretty well when he said, New Zealanders don't ask for much. All they want is someone to love, somewhere to live, somewhere to work, and something to hope for. That is what Labour has always stood for, and it's what Labour stands for now. and it's what drives me politically. And that's why this election is about your work, about going to work and earning a decent wage, about your home, affordable homes, whether that be rentals or home ownership, and about your family, about making sure all our kids get the best start in life. And for these reasons, I'm asking you to support me to continue to be your local Member of Parliament in Wigram and to party vote Labour so that we can once again have the most decent country in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Richard Wesley, Green Party.
Kia ora. Party vote Green. I love New Zealand and I want to see a cleaner, fairer and smarter Christchurch. I live in Spraydon. I've got a wonderful wife and 3 wonderful kids. They're actually 3 under 5, so it's a busy household. I want to be able to take my kids and go to the beach, to play in the rivers, to spend long weekends and summer holidays enjoying what New Zealand has to offer in the outdoors. But to do that, we need the Green Party's ideas and policies to ensure that there is a minimum standard on clean water and that we actually can be a world leader in addressing the causes of climate change. Party vote Green for a cleaner environment. I've had a working life that spans many different areas. I've been lucky enough to work overseas. One of the areas that I worked with was Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, working with logistics, engineering, water and sanitation. I've worked in places like South Sudan, Ethiopia, Cameroon. What I've learned and what's come into focus coming back to New Zealand with my young family is that there is no reason for child poverty in New Zealand. It is unacceptable. It is appalling. The Green Party has a suite of policies to address what absolutely is unacceptable in New Zealand society. Party vote Green for a fairer society. I originally trained as an electrical engineer. I've helped run a small business. I've worked overseas, as I've said. Right now, I'm working as a business analyst, rebuilding Christchurch and the infrastructure. I've never stopped learning and growing and ensuring that I'm adding value to whatever I do and whatever's in front of me. I want everybody else to have that opportunity too. I want to have free and accessible education for everybody. I want to ensure that everybody has the possibility and the best start in life to make the best for themselves. So I want you to party vote Green for a smarter economy. Cleaner, fairer, smarter. That's why I'm passionate about the Green Party and why I think that a vote for the Green Party will be a vote for a change of government and a new direction for New Zealand. Party vote Green.
Thank you. Lois McClintock, Internet Mana Party.
Kia ora, I'm Lois McClintock. I'm the Internet Party candidate for Wigram and Internet Mana list candidate. Tonight I'm not here to ask for your electorate vote, I'm here to ask for your party vote for Internet Mana. I got into this because I firmly believe that everybody deserves a fair chance and equal opportunity, and that's something that we're not really getting in New Zealand at the moment. And especially after our Christchurch earthquakes, we've seen a huge amount of problems, and that really spoke to me. And standing for the Internet Party and Internet Mana was my opportunity to be a conduit for the people of Christchurch and New Zealand to stand for what they want and what they need. You'll find that the Internet Party and Internet Mana have quite a democratic process where they want the people of New Zealand to actually have the say in their policies. So it's not someone just dictating what that is for the rest of the country, and that's what really drew me in. As for what we're after feeding the kids that are in the poorest families and schools so that they can get through their education, a living wage with a right to work. We want to bring back democracy in Christchurch because the local voice has been taken away. But one of the things I really wanted to say to you is I wanted to give you this challenge for everyone at home, is why not vote Internet Mana? Because you've got all the hype and all that on TV at the moment, and what you don't get is the policies. I challenge you all to go online to internetmana.org.nz and look at all our policies, and if you can't find a reason why not to vote for Internet Mana, then party vote Internet Mana. And if you can't get online because you don't have internet access, well, a party vote for Internet Mana will fix that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Kalvali, National Party.
Thanks, Tim. I just want to start by saying I've come from a very humble family. And one of the things I learnt from my father very early on in my career is a strong work ethic. And when I borrowed $60 from my brother to buy a bus ticket to move to Christchurch when I was 17, I've applied that work ethic to everything that I've done. And that created an opportunity for me at 21 to buy into a business. And there's a lot of stuff I learned throughout that business, specifically how to balance the needs, the economic needs of a business against actually looking after the people in your business as well. And in 2005, one of the things that really struck me was when our political opponents were sitting there going, all business owners are rich and they needed to be taxed more. And I was sitting there from paying all the staff and paying all the bills, and sometimes there'd be nothing left for me. And I didn't understand how they would want to penalise people who work so incredibly hard and sometimes for not a lot of gain. And it seemed really counterproductive to me that the people that worked the hardest, that did the best in business, would get penalised for doing it. And in that year, our political opponents won the election, and they subsequently put up the tax rates for hardworking business owners. And it was the Tuesday after that I went and knocked on my local MP's door. And as I knocked on the door, this is what I was thinking to myself. The easiest way for our country to be governed unfairly is for good people to sit by and do nothing. And I wasn't prepared to be a good person who would sit down and actually let this happen. And I went and introduced myself and said, hello, my name's Carl, how can I help? And it's that passion that I want to bring to this electorate, is the ability to help, the networks that you can bring to this, and it's the ability to balance the economic principles of our country against the social needs of our people. And on balance, National does that better than anyone else. So a party vote for National is going to keep New Zealand working and working for New Zealand, and a tick for me will keep me in there as a sound, sensible, balanced view for those people in the Wigram electorate as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Look, that's been interesting. We've heard from all the candidates at a personal level, their alignment with their parties, what they represent and to who they represent. It's time for us to take a short break. When we return, we'll be talking about the economy in the Wigram electorate and the wider Canterbury region. Don't go far. Welcome back to Election 2014, where we are identifying the important issues for the Canterbury region in the lead up to the coming general election this Saturday. Before the break, we learned about the candidates in the Wigram electorate at a personal level and heard what they stand for as individuals. It's now time to look at a key economic issue facing the electorate, and it is the economy. There are many businesses in the electorate. That makes many business owners who employ many employees. Let's talk minimum wage, living wage, and understand how business owners are going to go and be able to afford this, how they're going to fund it. Now I'm going to start with you, Richard Wesley. Please talk us through the policy, the funding and the strategy behind the minimum wage.
Minimum wage in New Zealand is a tool to ensure that those doing the hardest work, those on the minimum wage, get a fair reward for their work. Currently, the minimum wage has been moved up very, very slowly and is falling behind the cost of living. Cost of living, inflation, keeps on moving. We need to ensure that those get a fair reward for a fair day's pay. So the Green Party is very much in favour of moving the minimum wage up in steps over time, moving up out to 2016. But more importantly, we need to work towards a living wage, a wage that people can actually live on and bring up their families and give them the opportunities they need. It's terrible that of those kids in poverty right now in New Zealand, many of them are to working families. Effectively, those are families with one or two parents in work, working at the minimum wage and still not able to make ends meet, to provide the education, the food, the upbringing that gives that child an opportunity to make the best of themselves and really take the opportunities that New Zealand has to offer. Often you hear arguments about the minimum wage, oh, business can't afford it, everything will go backwards. Well, actually, the minimum wage has moved up every year over the years, looking back. What it does is it provides more money for the economy. It provides that boost. Here in Christchurch, obviously, we've had the Christchurch earthquakes. We had a big dip in GDP. We had a big backward step. We're already almost back to where we were, and we'll be ramping forward. That's because of the rebuild, the money flowing into the economy. Clamping down on a minimum wage to say that, sorry, businesses can't afford it, is like saying, well, sorry, those businesses don't want customers with the money to pay for goods and services. So the Green Party's very supportive of an increase in the minimum wage.
Carl, views on the minimum wage and the funding side?
Oh, look, so I'm absolutely confident that the minimum wage goes up. And interestingly, this is the first government in the whole history of New Zealand that has put the minimum wage up every single year it's been in government. And there's a couple of points I want to make on this. This is about putting it up in line with where the economy is growing. It's not about putting it up 20% above where the inflation is. And this is the challenge, and this is where coming into and actually having a business background and actually working with business owners, and you get to understand some of the levers that push and pull on this as well. Because to take an example, so one of the business I had was in the hospitality business, and if we look for every dollar we made, about 40 cents of that would go to a cost of a wage, and of that we would make about 10 cents in profit, and that's what we aim for. Most of the time it was about 6 or 7. If you take 20% and you increase that 40 cents, it becomes 48. And then if you look at it, you're making less than 2. So a couple of things need to happen. And generally what happens is you need to put your prices up. And if you have a 20% lift in the wages and then people need to put their prices up, it increases prices, which increases inflation, which means interest rates increase. And it's not about saying we shouldn't be putting it up, but we just need to be sensible around how we put it up. And this is what the national government does. They understand it's a steady curve that goes up with the rate of which the cost of living is going up, not making big increases on it. Because if you start increasing it and interest rates increase, then everyone loses from that economic benefit.
Megan?
Look, I think it's a really interesting question. And look, I come from a business background too. Before I entered Parliament, I was a business manager at a Crown Research Institute, and I worked with some of the country's largest companies and with some small startups, understanding how science and research and development could be used in their businesses. But the thing that I think National are really failing to see, and the example that Carl just used there, that if you look at hospitality as the example, that hospitality is actually one of the industries that improves with an increase in the minimum wage. Because what we know from experience is that those on the lowest wages actually spend pretty much everything they earn. So it's stimulatory. It's recycled back through the economy. So scaremongering about saying it's going to create unemployment simply isn't backed up by either economic theory or evidence. What we saw when we were last in government, that we raised the minimum wage from around $7 something through to $12 by the time we finished. So we did raise the minimum wage last time we were in government quite substantially, and unemployment fell. So to say that it's going to cause unemployment has no basis, and actually economic theory doesn't back that up either. So if we look at the experience and the theory, we can see that.
I understand that, but the question is, what about the point where those who are paying a lot of wages and a lot of businesses, like for example in your electorate, won't be having people who are on the minimum wage coming and buying their products. You know, it could be a range of other products. So it's not saying that we're a zero-sum economy in a small town. This is a country with a minimum wage and a lot of business owners needing to fund a big increase.
Absolutely, and and for people that, if you look at the example like hospitality, and there is some hospitality in Wigram, there is going to be more money spent in those segments. But actually, if you have a look at what is one of the very large employers in Wigram and sets it apart from other electorates in the city actually is manufacturing. And that's where our plans to move us beyond commodity. And you won't find many manufacturers paying the minimum wage, that they're about skills training, they're about getting people into higher wages, and that's our vision for New Zealand, is to create higher paying jobs. And that's backing our businesses to do that. That's investing in R&D tax cuts. It's a tax break. So it's not about just loading businesses with tax, it's about backing them. It's about putting in place accelerated depreciation so they can invest in the plant and machinery that they need to be flourishing manufacturers. And it's about things like my private members bill, which is instead of paying the dole directly to 18 and 19-year-olds, that we use that as a subsidy of around $9,000 a year directly to employers for them to be able to take on more apprentices, give them the skills, and this is how we lead to higher paying jobs. And this is the road we have to go down. We cannot go on the race to the bottom where we think, as Bill English said, our competitive advantage is our low wages. I want more for New Zealand than that.
Lois?
Well, I think it's absolutely affordable, and what we need to think about is the fact that at the moment, no, we don't. We don't have a rock star economy, but we could. We could have a fantastic economy. With digital innovation and becoming world leaders in that, we can have a fantastic economy. We can lead the world, and New Zealand's got so much potential for green data centres and all that sort of stuff. So if we are to use that, and then once we've grown that economy, wages across New Zealand is going to be fantastic. Not only wages, but employment. And employment for full-time work, not just a couple of hours a week, but actually full-time work, so that everybody can afford to feed their children, to pay their rent. And it's really that simple if the government's willing to actually invest in these things.
Tim, I've done 150 street corner meetings now, and I've met far too many people who live in the Wigram electorate who are working hard for their family every week, and they're now paying $465 a week rent for something they were paying $290 before the earthquake. It simply doesn't add up. These people can't afford to pay their bills. We simply have to do what is right, and that is pay people a wage that they can afford to live on. I don't know what the alternative is. What kind of society will we be?
Thank you. It's time for us to take a short break. When we return, we will be talking about hungry children, poverty and the homeless, and in a broader national sense, and also understanding how these issues affect the Wigram electorate. Welcome back to Election 2014, where we are looking to distill the propaganda from the party policies in the lead up to Saturday's general election. Before the break, we heard from the candidates looking to represent the Wigram electorate in the next government on their views around the economy. And again, we focus much on the affordability of the wages and the inability for families to live on the wages being paid. I would like now to talk about people, the hungry and the homeless. Now, Carol, starting with you, this has become a major electorate issue, electorate topic for Labor. It's happened potentially as things have changed under the recent 3 years with affordability under a national government. What are your views on this from a party perspective?
Yeah, from the party, is through the toughest economic time that I think this country's ever seen, you've seen a government that's been prepared to stand by the most vulnerable people. And we've always understood that this is incredibly important for us as a government to turn around and actually look after the people who are generally finding things a little bit tough. And that's why you find that we've invested over $1 billion in the last year around accommodation supplements as well. But I do want to come back to this point, and this is actually understanding that there's no shortcuts to the road to Parliament. And I've been door knocking a lot of doors and meeting a lot of people, but I want to give you one specific example. And I knocked on the door and I said, introduced myself and said, is there any issues I can help with? And she said to me, could you lift the benefit? And I said, you know what, we're actually trying to, because as we lift wages, then the benefits will come up with it. But I said, have you thought about getting a job? And she goes, I've got a back problem and I can't work. I said, well, that's fair enough because we should be supporting you, but what would you do with the extra money? And she goes, well, I'm spending between $10 and $20 a week on food. And I said, you know what, that's not okay. And I said, there is grants out there that will give you a $50 food supplement so you can actually get specific money for food. And she said to me, but if I do that, they want me to do a budget. And I was like, well, shouldn't that be fair enough? And she goes, yes, but they don't like me smoking. And I was like, well, now it becomes a choice. It's a choice that if you're choosing to buy your cigarettes over buying food. And I said, we need to support you to give up smoking. She goes, but it's been about 40 years. I said, my father gave up smoking after 50. And I said, if he can do it, I'm sure you can too. And we will give you the support to help you give up the smoking. But if you're choosing to buy the cigarettes over the food, then that's actually where we need to focus, because this isn't a solution about actually giving you more money right now. It's about helping you make a better decision.
But Carl, going to the booze and cigarettes place is a really easy place to go.
Well,
the reality is, in Wigram, there is a whole lot of people who are doing their hardest for the family. They're not spending it on alcohol and cigarettes, and they cannot feed them.
In Wigram right now?
Oh, a huge number. Well, more than 50% of our schools are lower
not
decile.
Nationals, because there is support in place for those families, and there's no excuse for any kids to be going school hungry. And I did some shopping this morning, and I'll tell you this: it costs 11 cents to give a child a plate of porridge. It costs 12 cents to give them 2 Weet-Bix. It costs 8 cents to give them a bowl of rice.
Now there is money there.
There is money there to support the families that can't put food on their kids' plates, and there's a $50 a week grant, and that is more than enough. And yes, it may not taste all great in that, but at the end of the day, there is support there, and you're looking at a government that through the toughest times has stood by and will continue to stand by those vulnerable families. And ultimately, if you look at poverty, there's 3 fundamental drivers to it, and you look what national policies do, and it's to look at these things. The first one is around education. It's about getting better education. It's about creating jobs, and real jobs. So in Wigram and in Christchurch, 17,000 jobs, forecast another 17,000, higher paying jobs. And if you want to take a block on this to actually look at the debt provision of around Wigram, is if you take the Dean's Ave right up through to Matapo Street, the average wage on that used to be $16,300, and this is a 6-week-old survey. The average wage in that block now is $24,900.
That's because of displacement because of the earthquakes, because
but the
people who
point
used
is
to
the
live here
people in
can no
Wigram are
longer
getting
afford
better
to.
off, and they've actually got housing accommodation supplements, and for the first time too, we've got a government that is not just doing this for Housing New Zealand stock. If there's a private landlord, they will still give those subsidies on the
housing
accommodation.
accommodation supplement has been there for a number of years, and actually, it's been there for several decades. But one of the things that we've said is that the housing accommodation supplement is actually structured in Christchurch differently than it is in Auckland, because it used to be that our rents were lower. So one of the policies that we want to put in place after this election when we're government is actually to raise our accommodation supplement to Auckland levels, because we've got Auckland rents. But accommodation supplement isn't the long-term solution. The problem with housing in Christchurch is there aren't enough houses and it's driving up rents. We've got to address that, and we cannot rely on the magic of the market to have affordable
I'm loving the fact that
housing.
you've touched on the subject, because you've only got to look around Wigram right now and actually look at the building activity going on. And as a government, in the last 9 months, we've freed up more land in the last 9 years.
But
and do you know why it's taken such a challenge?
Have been built.
Do you know?
Only 2,000 houses have been
Everything
built.
you're taking credit for, Carl, is the Wigram subdivision. That was effectively RNZAF moved out of that how many years ago now? I mean, it's ridiculous to start and take credit out of the earthquake for people relocating to then try and say, well, the government's done this work. What you've just articulated with your argument is talking about averages
more than Wigram
and moving up
There's
averages.
Lincoln Road.
No, what
you
we
can
want
buy
to
a
do
brand
is
new
target
two-bedroom
children.
home
We
on
want
Lincoln
to
Road right
target
now for
children that are in
$385,000, brand
need.
new.
That's where we need to go. We need to ensure that schools are a hub of a community, that kids who don't choose their parents, who don't choose to smoke, who don't have any impact on their family budget, those guys get what they need to succeed. They go to school, they are clothed warmly, they are fed, they are looked after. We want to provide healthcare to GPs for teenagers. Teenagers don't have a choice about their income levels. This is where we need to do.
Years,
You do not.
free
You do not.
healthcare.
So where is the results? What we see in New Zealand over the last 6 years, National has been in government for 6 years, and there has been no movement in the child poverty. These are our most needy kids, and these are the ones that we need to support. And all we hear from you is, oh, on balance, things are feeling all right.
So
This
great.
is-
So
this
you
is
talk.
putting
So what
aside
we're not
the real
talking about
issue.
is a widening gap, is because right now that gap has stayed steady for the last couple of years.
The
And
reason
if we're really
these
fair about
kids
it,
are not
it's
getting
actually
fed is because the housing prices for rent and affordability is going up so high that parents are having to choose between, do I keep a roof over my family's head or do I feed the children breakfast? That is the problem. And you can't just focus on Wigram skies.
And
Just
I
because
commit
you've
this
got
to you.
housing
I
developments
commit this
going
to
on
you.
doesn't
As your
mean, what
elected
about the poorest
representative,
areas?
if anybody
Well,
comes to me and
Megan
says that they
actually
cannot
keeps
afford
her
to put
electoral
food on
office
their
in
kids'
one of the
plates,
poorest
I will
areas.
be the first person that
Full
stands
credit
up
to
and actually
Megan.
makes sure that those kids have got food, because we have accommodation supplements and we have the ability
isn't
to
about
fund
charity.
food on those
This
plates.
is about decent salaries for people so they can go to work and they can have the pleasure of being able to provide for their
And
families.
under a national
And
government, we're seeing
No, they're not.
wages increase.
No, we're not.
We're looking at a drop here.
46% of New Zealanders have not had a pay rise in the last 12 years,
Not to
and that's
mention
most
your
of the
employment
constituents
statistics
in
are
Wigram.
rubbish.
I'm not
because
standing
you
here
say
to
that
represent
people
the
are
people in
getting
New Zealand. I'm here to represent the
employed,
people of
but they're
Wigram, and
not,
I
because
will
they're
be
only
the
getting a couple
person
of hours
that'll
a
turn
week.
around and make sure that their kids are fed and they have enough for the houses they live in, because we have the accommodation supplements. And do you know what else we're doing? We're actually partnering with organisations that are very good at putting together the social housing. And you've only got to look at the areas like Leslie Keys Drive, because there's more subdivisions going on than Wigram Skies. You've got Kintyre Estates, but Leslie Keys Drive is a really interesting one, where you've got 44 social housing, you've got a commitment from the government to put $5 million in it, and they're going to have 10 affordable homes for people at the end of that development.
10 is a drop in the bucket. It's great. It is absolutely fantastic what is happening there, and I've been working very closely with the Housing Foundation. And of course, Leslie was a very good Labor City councillor for the area and has fought for social and affordable housing in that area for a number of years. But 10 is a drop in the bucket. We need structural solutions to this, Carl.
That is one
Saying you're
instant
going
of
to
a
solve
total
every
package around
individual
putting-
case isn't the way to be a good electorate MP.
I'm just saying
it's
that
about
you
having
must look
structural
at priorities,
solutions.
because if kids are going in Wigram, if kids are going to school hungry, then we must turn around and address that. And yes, there's a short-term solution to that, but there's a long-term thing. And I'll tell you what drives poverty. Let me finish.
And Labour.
Let me finish.
Have no long-term solutions.
The real solutions to make sure they get
more
a job.
jobs. 84,000 in the last 12 months, 178,000 if we keep going on the same track. Hang on, let me finish. The other thing is health. Better immunisation. We have the highest immunisation rates now of children than we have ever had in this country. The other one is around education, which is developing and actually making sure that we have a high quality teacher in conjunction with the class sizes as well. And do you know what one of the big kickers in here is our alcohol and drug reform. And I'll give you some statistics around how well this is working for New Zealand right now. Because if you take February this year, if you compare it to February the year before, there was 1,258 less alcohol-related crimes between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. and that same month corresponding last year. The alcohol reforms that the National Party is putting in place is actually working. It's working for New Zealand, and people need to understand that Tick for National is going to keep it working for New Zealand.
The Royal Commission wasn't followed by National. The Royal Commission wanted the government to go further on alcohol reform. They wanted to give more power to communities, and we put up supplementary order.
This is the balance I talk about, because it's a balance. Is how do you do it without penalising responsible drinkers?
We could have done much better.
It's time for us to take a short break. When we return, we'll be talking with the candidates on the post-earthquake recovery, housing, schools and roads. We can't have a debate in Christchurch without addressing the post-earthquake issues. Don't go far. Good evening, welcome back to Election 2014. Before the break, we talked about the issues of the homeless, and we talked about the issues of hunger. Children going to school without adequate food, and what the National believe the government have done to counter that, what Labour Greens believe that they would be looking to do to change it. Now, what I would like to now talk about is the issue around post-earthquake recovery. Now, within the electorate, there's been a lot of movement of business out to some of the business parks. We've seen a lot of the new housing come up, which is we've already talked about. What I'd like to do is start with Megan and ask Megan, where are you at on post-earthquake recovery?
Well, I think, as I said in my opening statement, that the recovery of Christchurch and Canterbury is literally happening in Wigram's back garden. And that's bringing with it a huge amount of exciting opportunities, and that's great. But it also does bring with it a large numbers of challenges. And transport is one of the key ones, that our roads are congested. And we need to be very careful that Wigram doesn't become a section of neighbourhoods locked between main roads and no one can move outside of the gridlock of that. And that's why I've worked very closely with some of the local communities in Addington and Avonhead around issues to do with parking when business parks have moved into their area, and the fact that you can't just have people's neighbourhoods become a giant parking lot. And it's also why we're backing commuter rail, because we've got to have long-term solutions. Housing, we've talked a bit about that. We've got to have a plan around housing. Labor said we'll build 10,000 houses in Christchurch in 4 years, because we have to be moving at that kind of pace and scale to have any kind of impact on the housing crisis that we are currently seeing. And we've also got an interesting time with our schools in the electorate, because of course and 2 of our schools went through a very painful process around the closures and mergers, and the communities really felt let down by the fact that both Manning and Branston intermediates were closed. So we now have rebuilt schools going into the electorate, and I'm working really closely with both Hornby and Hillmorton Highs to make sure that we're doing the very best we can for our kids in those new schools.
Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Megan says, transport is a major issue for Wigram and for Christchurch generally going forward. We've obviously had major disruption in Christchurch with the earthquakes into the roading and infrastructure. We're putting those things back. Let's put them back better. The Green Party has a policy to create a Transport Canterbury instead of having things split between New Zealand Rail, Environment Canterbury, Christchurch City Council, Sierra. We want to see one organisation, Transport Canterbury, put together a really clever plan to move us forward into the future, so that we don't just build back the way it was before, that we have exciting, innovative ways to do things, enabling other alternative means of transport around Christchurch. We want to see the housing stock obviously rebuilt and put back, but we also want to see it put back better into standards that meet minimum standards, a building warrant of fitness, so that people who are renting houses can demand a certain level of service and a certain standard.
Lois?
Yeah, so obviously we definitely need to sort out the transport. We also need to think about in those areas that we've got that are booming, we need to consider the fact that we've chucked a whole bunch of industry in there, but we haven't factored in that there is still schools nearby, or that people are still trying to travel when we don't have cycleways or appropriate pedestrian crossings and things like that for people to travel safely in other means other than cars as well. So we need to be looking at that and looking at public transport as well. We also need to remember that we're still recovering. There's a lot of booming businesses and building going on, but there's still a lot of people who haven't had their repairs sorted. They haven't had a lot of things sorted out. They're still waiting on insurers, they're still waiting on EQC, and all that still needs to be addressed. You've got still areas like Barrington that actually need a lot of their water mains fixed up as well. They're still getting flooding on a regular basis, which still needs to be addressed. And the psychological effects going on 4 years on from now is just horrendous, and there's not enough support as well for that. So we need to be looking at boosting our services around mental health support, because people are still suffering, and because it's become part of their daily lives, they're just getting worse and worse and worse. So we need to be looking at that as well.
Carl?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's great to hear all the others talk about how much the economy is booming, especially around the Wigram electorate. And there's a couple of points I want to make on this. The first one is around, I understand the constraints put around the different infrastructure, but if we're looking at the rebuild of Christchurch Central, so let's take, for example, 13 government agencies with 1,100 employees. So by the end of 2016, there'll be the space for those people to merge back into the centre of the city. So we're looking at, okay, so what's short term, what's long term? Things around, and this is another one of the commitments that I make to the people of the electorate as well, which is if there's specific issues around water mains, is I'll be a strong voice for you to talk to the people that can make that stuff happen. And as consequently, I know one of the people who works in the Skirt Infrastructure Rebuild team, is to talk to them and turn around and say, can we speed this stuff up? Because this is what your elected representative is there to do. It's not about complaining about the problems, it's actually about finding a solution and knowing the right people, having the right networks where you can make this stuff happen. And I'll bring a specific example of this into something that I've been able to put together in the last couple of months that's been actually there for the last 2 years, which is the Land Use Recovery Plan. And if you look at the people of Avonhead, and yes, they've got massive restrictions around that business hub that's been sitting there and the parking that sits around it, but the land beside that at the end of the cemetery was zoned for light commercial industrial, and the residents of Avonhead for the last 2 years have been battling for that to be changed. And that has never been brought to the attention of the people that can turn around and make those decisions. And in the last month, we've actually got the consensus from the Earthquake Minister and also from the Mayor of the City Council that during the planning process next year, that stuff will be addressed. And this is what you miss by having somebody who's not a strong voice that's sitting around the decision table in the Wigram electorate, and this is what I can bring to you people.
Actually, Carl, I've been working on that issue, and I've been talking to the City Council about it. I've attended public meetings in Avonhead about just that issue, and I've discussed it with a range of our City Councils.
You got for the people of Avonhead
to get it moved to phase 2 of the district planning process,
and
which
the
is
residents
exactly
of
what the
Avonhead are
people of
sitting there
Avonhead
going,
want.
where is Megan? She's missing in action.
Well,
we want somebody who can make
Carl,
this stuff
I was
happen.
going to public meetings a year and a half ago about that. Were you at those meetings?
And here's the thing, Megan, since that time, they have seen or heard nothing from you.
That's simply
and
not the
now,
case.
within
That's
4 weeks of actually hearing that issue, we've got a resolution on it.
That's because the City Council made a decision to put it into phase 2, and I've been having discussions with City councillors about it
Megan,
for the
what
last
the people
2
of
years.
Wigram want is a strong voice that can sit around the table, and I can deliver that for the people of Wigram a lot more effectively than what you have in the last 3 years.
Well,
What
we'll
Carl's-
see the
what Carl's
decision on that on
suggesting for
Saturday.
Christchurch is it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. Basically, the Green Party is about transparency, about democracy. We want to see Sarah wound down as soon as possible. We want democracy given back to the people of Christchurch. First, we had Environment Canterbury elected representatives fired. Then we had Sarah ride in on a white horse to save us all after the earthquake. We want our Christchurch City back. We want Christchurch City Council elected representative making decisions. We want Environment Canterbury back with elected representatives making decisions for us.
Right.
Okay, it's time to take a short
so
break.
does the national government, and that's why we're going to phase it in.
It's time to take a short break. When we return, we'll be hearing from the candidates in the final section on what they will do as individuals in the first few weeks after being elected, what will keep them awake at night, and what they'll do during the following term. Don't go far. Welcome back to Election 2014. This evening we are talking with the candidates looking to represent the Wigram electorate. Before the break, we talked about post-earthquake recovery. Now it's time to ask the candidates what they will do over the next 3 years if they're elected. It's time also for the final question that I ask each week: what will keep them awake at night during the next term? You have 2 minutes and I'll ring the bell around 30 seconds to go. Now I'm going to start with Carl.
Thanks, Tim. Having 2 sons, actually what I look at right now and what keeps me awake is that we miss the opportunity that we have as a city right now. So driving home with my son a few months ago, just saying, do you realise that when the city comes online, it'll be the ideal playground for you? And this is my concern, is that we rebuild what was rather than focusing on what can be. The other issue too is that my children will see more opportunities overseas than they will here. And this is where I'm passionate about making sure that we can happen in this stuff as well. Building a Christchurch that can be, not one that was. Making sure that all of our children see more opportunity here than they do overseas. And the most important thing is that we create an environment where these children can succeed. And that's what I'm committed to do for the people of the Wigram electorate, is to be a strong voice for you, to turn around and help where I can, and ultimately it's about making life easier for the people in the electorate.
Thank you. Richard Wesley.
Great. Well, party vote Green. I love New Zealand, I love Christchurch, I love Wigram. What I'm asking for tonight is your party vote to ensure that we have a cleaner, fairer and smarter Christchurch, that we can bring up our kids, that we can live ourselves, that we can enjoy everything that New Zealand has to offer. To do this, we need smart green policies focused on the future, not just focused on the next 3 years, not just focused on a few minor indicators, things that focus on things that really matter to us. We want to ensure that we have cleaner beaches, cleaner rivers, a water standard that it actually means something and that we can work towards. We want to see smart green innovation. We want to ensure that the New Zealand economy continues to produce smart, high-paying jobs, not just exporting commodities to China. I want to see a fairer society where we look after everybody, not just the top 2% or even the top 10%, but where we actually look after everybody throughout. Raising the minimum wage, ensuring that our kids have food in their bellies and have everything they need to strive and achieve their potential, and breaking the cycle of poverty in New Zealand. There's no excuse for it. There's no reason why we can't do it. Just party vote Green. Thank you.
Thank you. Internet Party, Lois McClintock.
Well, the thing that keeps me awake at night is the fact that we have a whole bunch of people homeless in our own city of Christchurch, and that we have a huge amount of social inequality and children going hungry. So what can a party vote for Internet Mana bring to you? Well, we want to feed those kids. We want to make sure that the kids in low decile schools and low income families are making sure that they're not being disadvantaged because of that, so that they're able to learn because they're not hungry, so they're able to be fed at school. We want free tertiary education so that everybody has a chance to get a good education. We want a living wage with a right to work, a digital economy, responsive and transparent government, cheaper universal internet to give everybody a chance to have access to that amazing technology. So for equal opportunity, give your party vote to Internet Mana. Thank you.
Thank you. Labour Party Sitting MP, Megan Woods.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having us in tonight. It's been a pleasure. What keeps me awake at night is that we're settling, that we seem to have lost the dream of being the most decent country in the world. And we've got a plan to restore that, because we can do better than the unequal society that we're currently living in. If you re-elect me as your MP, I'm going to do what I've done for the last 3 years, and I'm going to build on that. I've been accessible. I've set up community clinics once a month in different parts of the electorate. So once a month I go to a local hall or church or school in your neighbourhood, so when you can't come and see me through the week at my electorate office, you have good access to your elected representative. I've listened to you, but most importantly, I've acted and I've brought about change. When the residents of Addington told me they were sick of living in a parking lot, I showed leadership and I brought around a solution by bringing together Environment Canterbury, the City Council and various other players. I supported our local schools and communities through what was a very painful process through closures and mergers. When the Oweka pit caught fire, I was the one that made sure that both information and progress was made about putting out that fire. And then there's been the literally thousands of individual cases that I've put through my electorate office, where I've helped people that are still struggling with EQC and insurance issues 4 years on. I want to stop dealing with this on an individual level, and I want the kind of solutions that Labor is talking about, and that's about bringing about an end to the insurance and EQC mess. It breaks my heart that I have people coming into my electorate office every week who simply cannot afford somewhere to live, and that is something I have supported many people through and found solutions for them. But there simply aren't enough piecemeal solutions. We need proper solutions that's going to put an end to this kind of pain. There are so many issues that a local member of parliament deals with, and they need to be able to deal with in an empathetic and action-focused way. That's what I've given you, and it's what I will continue to do as the Member of Parliament for Wigram. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, we've heard from the candidates, we've heard from what the plans are, what they'll do for us if elected, the party policies. Now, in wrapping up, I would very much like to thank the panel for joining me. National Party candidate, Carl Varley.
Thanks, Tim.
Internet Mana Party candidate, Lois McClintock. Green Party candidate, Richard Wesley.
Thank you very much.
And sitting MP, Labor Party candidate, Megan Woods.
Thank you very much.
Now, this is it's the last show in the series. We would love to have carried on next week, but the election is on Saturday and it's time for you to vote. Our role is over. We're delighted with the feedback that we've received and know that many voters have had the opportunity to get to know their candidates a little bit better through the series. Now, some of you might have heard, but I'll mimic it again. We're like the MasterChef kitchen, we've been boiling over with election fever. We're in the countdown. It's up to you to go and vote. You're better informed. From the comfort of your own home, you've had the privilege of understanding what the candidates stand for and who they really are. Happy voting, and remember, if you don't vote, you can't complain at the outcome. Next week at 7 p.m. is the premiere of the new show showcasing all things male called Mainly Male. Now, I'm not sure much more about it, but I hear it's on 7 p.m. next Tuesday on CTV. I am Tim Howe. It is time to sign off. It has been a privilege and an honour to host this Election 2014 series on CTV. Thank you for watching, and I say good evening.